some drivers are definitely about your own thinking and your own behavior. But we exist in an ecosystem, and one of the things I encourage people to do is have a personal board. So have a personal board. And lots of people talk about this, so it's not a new idea. A bit of a magpie, as are most coaches. But this idea of a personal board. So think about a board in a business. You've got all these different skill sets. A personal board is the same. So I would encourage you to have a mentor. No matter how senior you are, I'd encourage you to have a mentor. I'd also encourage you to do some mentorship, because your ability to reflect on the way you see the world when you are mentoring someone else is fascinating. So get a mentor, get a coach. And this is not a plug for me at all. I'm busy. But get a coach in your life, a business coach who can help you, who understands your business and can give you some context to your thinking.
How do you get 10,000 people to take a step to the left? What's behind the relentless mindset of a world champion? Why do teams of exceptional talent fail? How do you manage the pressure to perform? These are just some of the curious questions we will attempt to answer as we bring you world leaders, curious minds, exceptional talent, successful CEOs, and incredible human beings who know how to inspire great leaders and are inspiring great leaders themselves. I'm Craig Johns, high performance leadership expert, international speaker, and CEO of Speakers Institute Corporate and World Sport Coach. This is the Inspiring Great Leaders podcast, where the ordinary don't belong. Welcome to the Inspiring Great Leaders podcast. Our guest today is a non-executive director, leadership coach, and the author of the Emotional Overdraft. Our guest has a BA Honours in Business Studies from the University of Brighton. Before focusing on business advisory services, leadership coaching, and mentoring, he held board and leadership roles in multiple successful marketing, digital, and communication agencies and companies. I have the privilege of bringing you the host of the Exploring Emotional Overdraft podcast and business advisor who loves rambling on, Andy Brand. Andy, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks, Craig. It's great to be here. And I just want to say straight from the off that obviously listen to your podcasts, and the comment a few pods ago about worrying productively just went straight at emotional overdraft for me. It was the idea that all your weaknesses can be strengths and vice versa. And that goes to the nub of what I talk about in the book, which is small behavior changes can be to your immense strength or to your immense detriment. And that's the opportunity of it. So I love that pod. I think he said worry productively. And that was a phrase that really stuck with me. So if we can get anywhere near something that memorable, we're going to have a crack at today.
All right, let's have a crack at that. And let's make sure we don't go into too much emotional overdrive, and we'll talk a lot about emotional overdraft, and we'll keep the listeners engaged here. Now, you've got a beautiful accent. Tell us, where did you grow up, and what was the big dream as you were running around the rugby fields?
Well, that's nice of you to say so. So I suppose my family are not. My brother and I were the first to go to university. My older brother and I. My family are not from an educated background, particularly, although bright people, thank goodness. But their drive for us was always to do as well as we can. So we came from a background where people, I think lots of people say this, on your podcast, is we came from a background where we were supported and encouraged, and I ended up, I don't know if it's in you or not in you, but I ended up with a very curious personality, in as much as I find everything interesting. I'm interested and excited about everything I see, and almost to the point of distraction sometimes, but I love how things work. I love understanding why people do what they do. I love the kind of what's the why behind the action, and the sort of so what of life. Something happens, well, so what? And then, well, that's because of this, but then so what? So if you could peel things back, I love that. So I think, and even to the point where, as an MD and running businesses, I always employ people with a brilliant attitude. I'd employ attitude way higher than skills. You can teach skills, you can't teach attitude, you know. So, and curiosity was right in the core of that. And I used to say to people, I'm looking for people who, when they're walking along, they notice the rock. They just notice that little rock. And particularly, I like people who notice a rock and then think, I wonder what's under that rock. And they pick it up and have a look. And maybe if you're really curious, you might just lick the rock. You know, it depends how curious you are. So I love that kind of, it's always been in me. It's what I've been look for in other people. So I'd say curiosity is my absolute driving force. As a kid, I didn't know that. As a kid, I think I loved business. My mother reminded me a while ago that I used to play post offices, which is the most curious thing that a kid would do. I mean, amongst other things. But I had this little date stamp, and I had a post office, and I would sell 10 stamps that I'd make, and my family would all buy these damn stamps off me, poor things. I can imagine it went on for years. So I think I've always been commercial. I've always been interested in that, and probably it ties back to why people do what they do, and that understanding. So at that level, I think it was always about commerce is just communication. It's just a dialogue, isn't it? Really, it just happens to be that the currency of it is financial rather than words. So I think that's where I started. I was always interested in business. I started lots of businesses. I washed cars like lots of people, and I made food and sold it on the street, and all those sorts of things. So I was always commercial, I think. So I was driven by that, but not by money. Weirdly, I'm not driven by money. I think I was driven by that. I mean, I hadn't really thought of it this way. It's a great question. Driven by that curiosity about what would people buy? Why would people buy this? Why would they buy it now? I ended up in the university studying business studies and research, and I paid my way through university by conducting what they call field work. So basically, I'm one of those people that walk up to you in the street with a clipboard and say, "Excuse me, do you have time to answer some questions?" And that because my parents, couldn't afford to put me through university, I had to sort of work through uni. And that was, I think I calculated once, I've done about 20,000 interviews on the street over the 4 years I was at university. And you learn you learn how to approach people. So what you don't do, is a tip for everyone who's thinking my next career is going to be in field work, market research, is you don't eyeball someone early and head towards them and try not to lose eye contact, which is the worst thing you could do because they will cross the street to avoid you. What you do is you just hang around a little bit. You don't make eye contact. And when you do, you don't jump on them at the last minute, but you do make eye contact, but later than you probably would normally. And then you lead with this question, which is, I'd really value your opinion. And almost nobody can walk past, I'd really value your opinion, because that goes straight to the ego. It goes straight to the person. Whereas if you say, do you have a minute to answer a question? Of course they don't, because they're going somewhere. Whereas I'd really value your opinion. Most people just stop and once they've stopped, you've got them. So that's a top tip. If you stop listening now, scribble that one down. If you ever have to resort to market research, you'll be great. I don't know if that answered the question, Craig.
No, it's good. It's good. I love that one of asking about their opinion. I think it's beautiful, and I think it'd be good to talk about ego a little bit later on in this podcast. But first of all, you talk about curiosity, and it sounds like curiosity of human behavior. And obviously, we couldn't pick from your background that you were a curious person. And for those just listening, there's a lot of books on that bookshelf, and I love it too because they're not very organized. Well, they kind of are organized, but they're organized in different ways. So I like that fact where it's kind of like human.
Well, they're not
beings.
color coordinated, that's for sure. Which is when I see people with their books organized by color, I think you don't read those books.
I like it. Now, were you obviously you had kind of this commercial entrepreneurial mindset, obviously not so much for money, but you definitely had an entrepreneurial type mindset where you're kind of thinking about, how can we do something? How can we connect with people, etc. But were you more of a leader or a follower during your teenage years?
That's interesting. So I would say a leader, but I would say a very particular type of leader. I was recently doing a guest lecture spot at a uni in London, and we were talking about leadership. It was on a business course, and we were talking about leadership. And I asked the question. I said, "Are there?" I will to your question, by the way, but I asked, "Are there any leaders in the room?" And there about 100 people there, and this one kid puts his hand up, and he says, "I think I'm a leader." I said, "Great, and what's that? And where do you lead, and what do you do?" And he said, "I think I'm leading by asking this question, because no one else has had the courage to ask something, and I think I'm showing people how to behave and how to engage." And we had a 5-minute discussion about leadership, and he was spot on. I mean, I would argue that's probably a form of servant leadership. But it's really interesting and very astute for a 20-year-old. That's the sort of person I would employ, by the way. That's the sort of attitude. And so I think I aspired to that level of self-awareness, which I definitely don't have. But I think I was I led from behind. I wasn't the sort of charging over the top, follow me lads type of leader. I think people followed me, but not behind me. I think people looked to me I'm definitely aware of that. They looked to me for what to do. They looked to me to organize things or to lead we used to ride all over the country when we were kids. When, crikey, my parents were mad to let us. I was 10 and I cycled 300 miles with some friends of mine, stayed in youth hostels. I mean, you couldn't do it now. You probably shouldn't have done it then, but it was my idea to do that. I organized it and planned it. So, but it wasn't with the intention of everyone going, look at me. It was definitely with the intention of everyone having this incredible experience. And Tony, who I went with on that particular trip, still remembers it, and we still chat about it. And it was just, my intention was definitely not to have people follow me. Again, it's a bit like the commercial argument. I think commercially, financial success it's a consequence of some great behaviors. And I think the same with leadership. I think the impact of leadership is consequential. I think if you try and force the impact of leadership, then it becomes a lot harder. You have to bring the energy all the time. You have to be the radiator. And that's quite a bit of what's behind Emotional Overdraft, which I came to realize is the idea that you don't have to be the energy in the room all the time. You don't have to be the person where the buck stops. You don't have to be the person who fixes everything. You don't have to be the overload capacity all the time, because whilst those are all good motivations, it's not good practice, and it's not sustainable. It's not scalable. So I think instinctively that's the kind of, I was probably a leader. I was captain of the seconds, for example. So when they made me a captain, I played hockey. I was captain of the seconds, not I was in the firsts or captain of the seconds. So I was quite sporty, but never quite picked out as, I was in the army cadets, and I got 3 stripes very early on, which is the highest you can get to as a kid in the sort of cadets, really. But that wasn't about leading from the front. It was about organizing people. It was about facilitating, and that's, in fact, I'm off to London later today to facilitate a 2-day conference for a client of mine. And that's all about, it's not about you being center stage and jazz hands. That's all about, can you get 15 people together and produce something amazing at the end of it that didn't exist at the start? So that's my buzz. Is that, again, I've completely lost track of the question. It was about leadership, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's good to be a leader or follower. I think all good leaders are also great followers, and they know when to lead and when to follow, like you're talking about there. But you talked about there kind of being the magnet for people, the go-to person in a way. What do you think, what sort of characteristics do you think you had? Why do you think you were a bit of a magnet for other people, when they needed things done, or when they needed a question, or they needed a shoulder to lean on?
I was interesting. It's the same answer that I was just about to say when you said about the good qualities of leadership. I think I'm a very good listener. Curiously, people listening might think, the guy can't shut up, but it's a podcast, so I'm talking. I'm a good listener, and it's quite easy to say. And I think probably in the book I talk about try to be a listener, but it's an attribute lots of people say to new leaders: be a listener, be a good listener, 2 ears, 1 mouth, those kind of trite things. But actually listening is really hard, because we're waiting the whole time to jump in and go, oh yeah, I did one of those, or I've got one. Even if it's with good intention, even if it's just to show that you're listening, your brain is whirring away and filling in the gaps and creating its own next step. And actually active listening, really listening, is about being interested and curious in what the other person, genuinely interested in what the other person's saying, and then hearing it and processing it, and then potentially responding, potentially not. But I think that's a lot of people, I think, if I speak to them, say they feel heard. So probably that's at the nub of it. I don't think that's all of it. I think I'm pretty reliable. I'm the guy that people can go to. There's definitely some emotional overdraft traits in me around people pleasing. I'm definitely someone people know. If any of my friends were moving house years ago, they knew for a bag of fish and chips they could get Andy to come along and help them. I'm not just greedy. I'm cheap. I would come along and help, because I couldn't leave people if they needed some help. So there's definitely, I think, there's some of that, and that's where that really good, people pleasing, people think, well, that's not a bad thing, but we're coming to understand that if it's at your own cost, there's a cost you pay for that. Then is that really people? It's people pleasing, but it's not actually creating equal value. It's detracting from one person to give to another, and that's not the real good leadership. Is about multipliers. Liz Wiseman's amazing book, Multipliers, in fact, co-written by Greg McKeown, I discovered recently, who I think is an Australian. I might be wrong, but multipliers is that idea of leadership being you take people's skills and you add your own skills to that, and you multiply their skills up, and so you get this scaling of capability. And she talks about accidental diminishers as well. So what can look like leadership, what can look like multiplying behavior, can actually very easily accidentally be diminishing those people and reducing them. So it's a fascinating idea, I think, and it's one of those books you can read the first 30 pages and you've done it. But multipliers is a really interesting idea. So I think that's, if you can listen, if you can genuinely listen, you can hear what someone's genuinely saying. If you can explore behind what they're saying and understand the drivers behind that, then you set yourself up to help really let that person deliver to their maximum potential.
All right, so you've sparked a bit of curiosity in my brain, which is potentially dangerous. But let's have a go at this. So earlier today, I did another podcast interview that will be released soon, and we were talking about resilience, and that the fact that a lot of the younger people have grown up more in an era where we tend to do things for them. We tend to help pick them up off the ground when they fall over, so to speak. So they don't always get that chance to really learn those resilience skills on their own. Not everyone, like there are still a lot of people that build that resilience. I come from sport where you had to pick yourself up because your teammates were relying on you. So you kind of develop those things. And the reason we came about was I was like, why has everyone brought up this whole resilience thing? Why has it just become popular recently when, I don't know, it's what we've always done. Everyone's got the skill sets, but when you start to think back from it, everyone's got resilient skill sets, but I think sometimes we reduce the level of it, so they don't, when something really big happens, they're not quite prepared for the size of it, the magnitude of what they and how they cope with that from a resilience perspective. But we're talking about coaching. As coaches, obviously, in the true term of a coach, they talk about, and I'm not going to say a sport coach because I think they're very, very different to say coaching as a life coach or a leadership coach. But in the sense of the definition, it's around asking questions to help them come to realization. And we talked about in there the importance of that coaches actually need to stop asking questions. And the reason is we're helping them come to a realization rather than allowing them to actually try and fail on their own, right? Because that builds resilience. If someone else is helping you get to a conclusion, because as a coach and sometimes as a leader, if we're asking questions, we're actually going to guide them in a direction that's going to help them, which is great, but should we be doing that all the time? So question to you is, at times, do we just need to shut up and not even ask questions and just listen and allow them time for silence and allow them time to struggle on their own rather than coming in and asking the questions that help them get up on their feet a little bit too fast, a little bit too quick?
Oh, there's so much to unpack in there. Long answer short. I think we ask, as coaches, we ask questions a lot of the time as a proxy for actually giving advice. We're not really asking questions, we're giving advice in the disguise of questions. And it makes us feel good because we've got the answer, and then the coachee goes, God, that's great, that's perfect, that's exactly how I should see the world. So to some extent, yes, I think coaches can be and there are thousands of coaches, there are hundreds of thousands of coaches. It's become and there's more demand. So there is lots of demand for it. Nature abhors a vacuum, so it fills with people who can call themselves coaches, some of whom are qualified, some of whom aren't, some of whom are capable, some of whom aren't. But there's a danger with coaches that it is about, we go back to ego, it's about me showing how clever I am by helping someone find an answer. So clearly that's bad coaching. And I guess this was prompted by the thought of properly, listening deeply and really listening to what someone's saying. The response to listening is not always a question. The response, as you say, could be silence. And quite often with my clients, they get to the point where they just appreciate having the space to say it out loud. Give them the space to say it. Don't lead them. Don't guide them. Let them have the space just to say it out loud. And we all know what that's like. Just you think about it. We create our realities entirely in our own heads. Our lived reality is created in our own brains, which I know sounds woo-woo to lots of people, but it's the only way we create reality is in our own brains, and everyone experiences the world differently, even if we're looking at the same thing. So often we talk about living in our own head, just saying the words, finding the words, which can be quite limiting. So it forces us to explore the idea before we put it out into the world as words. It gives us the opportunity to understand. So if you give people more space, they have more time to talk, they have more time to hold it in their hands, explore it, look at it, pick the rock up, look underneath it, see what's there. And in doing that, most people, certainly all the clients I have already created reasonably successful businesses. So they're more than capable of solving the problem. Sometimes it's just giving them the forum, the space in which to do it. So I think asking questions is great. I think asking questions that are really answers is not great. And then if we go back to resilience, sorry, I just wanted to, because I think that's so important. And I do talk about resilience in the book, so I apologize for jumping on the bandwagon. But an emotional overdraft is the price that owners, founders, entrepreneurs pay, was the subsidy they put into their own business at the cost of their own mental or physical well-being. So we're subsidizing the success of our businesses at the cost of our own mental or physical well-being. And most people who run a business or lead a team or start a business recognize that state. And the currency, as I describe it, of an emotional overdraft is resilience. So the longer you are subsidizing your business, either mentally or physically or both, the less resilient you become. And the less resilient you become, the less capable you are of making good, sound decisions, of bouncing back, of being able to handle the sort of buffeting that comes your way. And I'm on a leadership WhatsApp group, and I read a very sad WhatsApp last night from someone who has lost 2 clients on the back of a bad start of a year. He's had a couple of staff resign. His business is on its knees. And this was a very long stream of consciousness in a WhatsApp. And it was just, where that guy's got to. He's got to the point where he's now thinking, is this even worth it? Do I have to get a job? Have I let my family down? And you can also probably guess how he's been feeling and the impact that's had on him to get to even this point. So it's resilience is I think we've understood the reason we talk about it a lot right now is we've understood that it is a condition or a state to be protected and to be nurtured and nourished. And that's really why I think it's become something we all talk about. Because if you are resilient, you can handle the knocks and the bangs and the, losing two clients, and you find another solution, and you rally your team around you, and everyone comes together, and you have a war room, and you go, right, what can we do about this? And does this create an opportunity? If you're not feeling resilient, that hits you again and again and again. And this guy ended up in hospital last night with a stress related, some just anxiety. And that's where you can be as well. So, and the same situation you can turn to your advantage. I mentioned, the seeing a negative as a positive. You can reframe it if you're feeling resilient and do something about it. If you're not, if you're depleted, you can't do anything about it. And that's why resilience is so important. Going right back to your first question, which was, are kids mollycoddled now, or are they not exposed enough to failure and to stress and to resolving their own challenges and all those things? I'm not sure. I think that might be a slightly easy response. And I am the kid at 10 who cycled off, hundreds of miles with his mates, and his parents just waved him off with a sandwich. So they were different times, but I suspect, I'm not an expert in this space, although I have got a couple of reasonably well-adjusted children. I think the protection that parents are applying to their kids now may be a reaction to the very rapid change in society in which we all live. So what's the driver behind more kids being less exposed to falling out of a tree or failure, or everyone has to, A-levels, exams in England have gone from, you got an A grade was good, then it was an A star. They changed the top level to an A star because you needed to differentiate further, and then they changed it to something else. This sort of grade escalation. Everyone gets an A and everyone wins. There's no losers. It's quite easy to kind of talk about that. And whilst it does exist, I think behind it might be something more complicated, which is we live in a really complex world. We have, every kid has a smartphone. I'm waving it at the camera. Every kid has a smartphone. Every kid is exposed to an always on stream of information. And as parents, we're trying to navigate that. And we never had it because most parents are not digital natives. We're that sort of crossover generation. So I think there's some complexity going on in there. And we know how damaging it can be. I mean, sticks and stones can break my bones and all that. It's not true. Words can be cripplingly dangerous for kids. And we see all of the, and kids bully other kids. That's how we find our space in the world, I guess. Passively or actively, we find our space by pushing at the edges and seeing what happens. And if you have a kid with a weakness or a kid without a weakness, every kid at school had a nickname. Every kid at school had something about them that was slightly different that people could pick on, because it made you feel more part of the whole. And so I think in this very complex, very evolving state that we live in, and it really is, what's that expression? It's never changed this fast before, and it'll never change this slowly again. That kind of idea is I think parental protectiveness is probably a reaction to that, rather than just, I have to look after my kid. I also do think, having employed a lot of people, we don't prepare through school. It's certainly in the UK, we don't prepare kids through school to come into work. I mean, it seems a surprise to them that they might not get an A star and a pat on the back, and it comes as a surprise to quite a few that people say no, or that they don't get promoted, or they don't get a pay rise every 2 years, twice a year. So yeah, there's some of it going on, but I wonder if if we get curious and we go, so what, and push through the layers of that, there's probably a pretty good reason behind it. And if we start to address the reason, then we might find we get people who are more resilient.
I like this. I like this diving into, the root cause of maybe why something is happening and what are those drivers. I think it's really, really important. We can sometimes jump to conclusions really, really fast. We can make judgments. Our our biases kick in. Now, this is how we did it, so why aren't they doing it the same? It's very, very easy to step in with those
And I'll
comments
guarantee,
or
by the way,
approaches.
your generation, you and you're a bit younger than me, but our generation, I will guarantee that our parents and our grandparents thought we had it easy, and their grandparents thought they had it easy. And go back to Spartan kids, and apparently they left them on a rock for 3 months to see if they could survive, and if they didn't, they were weak. So, that might be, I may have made that up, but I'm sure I read that somewhere. So, every generation thinks the next generation is a little bit mollycoddled, but it's what we want. We want a better life. We don't want our kids to have rickets. We don't want them to be in a world war. We don't want them to suffer, because at our primitive chemical level, hatch, match, and dispatch. We are designed to have kids and make sure they survive to keep our genes going. So of course we want the best for our kids. And every generation, if we've done something that is better for them, that's because it's a very, very primitive DNA level driver.
Okay, so we're gonna dive into some tough stuff here. You were talking about complexity and the world becoming more complex. We're talking about change occurring faster than what it has ever done before. And at this point, everyone's kind of predicting it's going to get faster. It's possibly going to get more complex. So what do we do about that, right? Do we just let it happen? Are we, so as human beings, aren't we supposed to protect and ensure that the next generation survive? Aren't we supposed to be looking after them? So it's interesting. In one sense, we are pushing faster than we ever have before, but in another sense, we're like, okay, we need to protect as well. So where is that balance? Where is there an end in sight in the speed of change and the complexity, or is it just going to keep going like this?
I wasn't expecting this to go in this direction. I'm a leadership coach and business advisor, and I'm just going to caveat what I say next with that, because there are people far more qualified than me who could talk about that. I can't see it getting any slower. I mean, we are just scratching the surface of AI, which is the next round of acceleration. And, AI will take all our jobs and we'll all become unemployed, and either we'll all live on the beach and have the life of Riley, or it's going to make us all destitute. Who knows? But they said the same thing about the looms back in the day, didn't they? That was the Luddites who smashed the looms because they thought it would take their jobs. So I think there's always going to be a new technology that comes along, whether it's a loom that can make a rug in a week rather than in a year, or, a factory that can make it in a day rather than a week. There's always going to be new technology. It's not going to slow down. It'll just be different. I think there's probably a very high level of disenfranchisement, if that's even a word, that we don't feel. And I may be projecting my own views here, but I get the sense that people don't feel they can change anything at a macro level. Politics is led by personalities, by people who can manipulate, people who are good at manipulating the way people feel, not think, because I always talk about feelings are a measure of the quality of your thinking. So if you want to know if you're not thinking particularly well, just check how you're feeling. Are you feeling angry, frustrated, irritated, annoyed? Those are really good measures of not good quality thinking. But if you can manipulate the way people feel, I mean, I won't name names, but Donald Trump, Boris Johnson, there's a certain sort of leader who is not really a leader at all, is all about themselves and all about manipulating the system to work to their advantage. And we won't go into politics, but I think that makes me feel less able to contribute, less able to influence, less able to have an impact on things. So then we look at global warming, we look at, which some people deny even exists still, which is astonishing. But what's our ability to impact global warming individually? We can do little things. I buy my shampoo in a bar of soap now rather than in a plastic tube. So there's, 12 fewer plastic tubes in the world each year. But it feels like very little. I wonder if that disenfranchisement is what's behind behind our reaction is, with kids, we feel we can do something about that. We can protect them to an extent. We can look after them. We can do something to make their lives better, albeit in a very short term, minimalist, probably. We're kidding ourselves. Actually, we're kidding ourselves that we're making their lives better. But we can end up with the contradiction that we end up consuming more. Not helping them by, kids should fall out of trees. Kids need scratches. We need to get the bumps and the bangs. We think we're protecting them because that's the thing we can influence. Our sphere of influence is quite small, and the complexity around us is getting faster and faster and more complex. So our world is shrinking around what we know, and that's probably the reaction we're seeing from people. And in my world, that's business. And I think I see the same thing in business as well, which is people who are bobbing around. I hear more and more. When I started doing this job, I didn't hear as often, well, there's a recession. Or, I blame the recession, so that's why we're not, our pipeline isn't looking very strong because of the recession. I didn't hear that before. The people it would be, well, there's some clients aren't spending money where they did, but money's moved somewhere else. I'm going to go chasing that money. That's how we used to think about it. Now we go, it's a recession, so that's why it isn't going very well. That's why I've laid some staff off. And I wonder if people are starting, business people, and this is sort of as a litmus for everybody else, are just starting to believe it a little bit. So there's not, in this, I live in England, in the UK, and our weather is notoriously not great. We have wet winters and we have mild, occasionally sunny summers, and that's always been the way. And it maybe is a bit wetter, maybe it is changing a little bit, but now every time there's a stormy day, and a storm is, I don't think it's 45-mile-an-hour winds and a certain amount of rain, I don't know the definition, but every storm has a name. Every storm gets a name now, which it definitely didn't 10 years ago, or certainly didn't in the public domain. So every storm's got a name, and everything comes with warnings about power lines coming down because someone's worried about being, if you didn't warn people, then it's a litigious society. So I do wonder if we've created this labeling culture where everything is just bigger and worse. And it used to be a cold day in England, where if the wind predominantly comes from the southwest, which is why it comes across the Atlantic, that's why it's wet. We get a wet country, and it's glorious because of it. We have lovely butter. Occasionally you have wind from the east, and very occasionally, and that's from the east means it's coming across Russia and across Europe, and it's generally drier and colder. Now that was when we used to get a bit of snow. Now though, that's called the beast from the east. When you get a little bit of cold weather, it's called the beast from the east. Now, 1962 is the last time in this country there was bonkers snow. It's like 3 or 4 months of snow, the whole country ground to a halt. Since then, you get a few days of snow, and then it goes away. So there's nothing beastly about it. And 62 is, more than 60 years ago. So this is now called the beast from the east. And every time there's a cold wind, they go, there's another beast from the east. So I wonder if I'm not blaming media, because you get the media you deserve, but I wonder if this labeling, this sensationalization, the need in social media, in constant always on communication to sensationalize, is possibly, if you're sensationalizing, you might be oversensitizing people. And if you oversensitize people, then they kind of shrink back a little bit and see a smaller world. And if you see a smaller world, then we do less good. That's the problem. If you go, my job is to protect my kids, then you will protect your kids, and that's at any cost. But if you think my job is to protect all kids, you see the world very differently. And if you think my job is to protect everybody who needs help, again, you see the world differently again. And that kind of narrowing of perspective, I suspect, makes people less tolerant, less kind to each other, less supportive, less willing to accept difference. So then you can have the people who go, let's build a wall, let's keep the Mexicans out, let's get our country back. As Boris is, we left Europe for the most valuable thing we could have been joined in, a single European connected commercial community. We left it so that we could get our power back. I mean, what power on earth did people in Britain, the 51% of people voted for Brexit, think they were getting back? In what world? In a global market, what did they think they were getting back other than trade restrictions? But you can label to the point of control. So I think that the more we look in, the more we look down, the more we look close, the less tolerant we become, the less we see other people, the quicker we are to judge. And that's a real shame, because I think a challenge for everyone listening. My hometown is a town called Brighton on the south coast, and it's a glorious, fun town. It's a fantastic place to be brought up, but there's a very big mix of poverty and wealth. It's quite close to London. It's London's seaside playground, but where there's wealth, there tends to be poverty, and a lot of people go there who live on the streets and are looking for some help. And we tend to walk past those people. We tend not to make eye contact. We tend not to see them if we can. I'd encourage people this week to be brave and strike up a conversation with someone on the street. They're everywhere. They're not just in Brighton, but it's where I started doing this. Have a conversation with someone, and don't just throw a coin at them or, nod at them. Actually say hello. Ask them a question. Be curious about that individual, because I can almost guarantee you that person is very like you, or was very like you, and has got to that place through a load of circumstances which were their fault and weren't their fault. So approach that person without judgment and just see what you discover, because I think those are the most marginalized people in our immediate society. And what you'll discover is there are people there who are really pretty much like you and me, almost always. And if they don't want to talk to you, they're going to tell you, probably in a very few words. So you'll know. But try that out and see what happens. Try being aware and not just walking past it. It will give you a perspective that will, I hope, probably make you feel a bit humble and maybe just widen your view of the world a little bit.
I like that. Sometimes we're quick to make that judgment. We're quick to, as you say, marginalize people without really understanding. Like we don't know what got them there or what the circumstances was. I think, maybe a few years ago, we always used to think, they were just, someone who is on an addiction, and whether it was gambling or alcohol or drugs, and which had led them to that spot. Whereas we're seeing more and more now that many of them are getting there because, emotionally they haven't been able to cope with the challenges of life, and they may have had a really successful business or a really successful job, and something changed.
And let me reframe that very slightly. You're right. You're totally right. But it's not many of them. It's many of us.
Correct. Yes.
It's we. It's people we know. They're not them. They are us. And so it's that peeling back the layers thing we talked about earlier. Addiction is an illness. So but it's probably not the addiction that got them there. It may not be the addiction. They might have become addicted to substances or whatever it is because of the circumstances they found them, sort of self-medicating. So it's never simple, but they are still people. And it's a thought experiment, and it's an experiment in social kindness. But I challenge you, Craig, do it this week. I'd love you to give it a go.
I'll have to go looking, because in where I live, we don't see them.
Okay.
So we're very fortunate. I'm sure they are around, but we don't see them in the area that I live. So when I'm in Sydney, for sure, we'll definitely. Or
when you're in
Melbourne,
the city,
in the big city,
yeah. Thank you.
But I'll definitely do that. We're talking. If we look at business, so you're a business advisor. If we look at businesses now, if we compare it back to when we were younger, when we were little boys running around and or little girls, etc. And they, at that time, the pressures or the challenges on a business are very different to what they are now, I would think. I mean, the fundamentals are probably still the same of business, but the potential challenges to that business have increased. You know, it might have been just literally setting up a store, you know, in your local little village, and you created, you know, there was a demand, and so you created supply for that. And there wasn't too much competition. There was none of this globalized competition that you have with internets now. There was possibly not the challenges of, you know, extra technology that was required. You might have just put the money in a tin can and you kind of count at the end of the day, and away you went. Now, it probably still happens in some parts too. But for you, what do you think are the biggest differences as a business owner that have occurred from when you were young to where we are now?
Well, I wasn't a business advisor when I was young, so I had less insight then, but I understand the question. I think it's the pace of change. I think I was on a coaches call where there are nearly 150 coaches on this. I mean, probably a thing to avoid for most people, by the way. If you find 150 coaches in the same call, go somewhere else. But the question was asked, well, what's the biggest challenge? They were all business coaches, and what's the biggest challenge that you're dealing with? And they were coaches who worked with massive companies and coaches who worked with small companies, but all leadership coaches. And almost without fail, the answer was a version of the biggest challenge they're dealing with their clients. And between them, I think they had certainly thousands of clients, I can't remember the exact number. And the biggest challenge that they're dealing with their clients was overwhelm. And I think that's coming from, that wasn't there before. There was stress in running a business. There was pressure in running a business, but overwhelm, everyone came back with a version of that. And I got very interested about that. I wondered why that was the case. And it's the pace of change. So I'm going to get the numbers wrong again because I'm just doing it from memory, and I'm 58 and I keep forgetting things. But the length of time that a company was in the top 100 ranked companies in America, I've completely blanked on. It's the FTSE in the UK, and it's Fortune 500, yeah. Or Fortune 100. The length of time that a company on average used to be in the Fortune 500 was 50 years. And this was in the 60s, I think. The length of time that a company is in the Fortune 500 now, I think, is less than 10 years. It might even be much less than 10 years. And it's getting less and less and less. And that's the biggest companies in the world. So companies used to grow, and they'd be there, and there'd be these decades of success, and gradually they buy each other and merge, or markets would change around them a little bit, and they'd ebb away again. But on average, 50 years. And you can work with that, and you can make mistakes in that space, and you can course correct, and you can buy the wrong company, and you can make some bad decisions and have a poor CEO, and you can come back and keep going. If the average lifespan is going to be 5 years, and this is the biggest companies in the world, so put aside the clients I work with are sort of typically between 10 and 100 people, so it's very small companies. But even the biggest companies in the world, if it's between 5 and 10 years they're going to last as a big company, you can't get anything wrong. You can't make a misstep. You can't make a mistake, because that could be 2 or 3 years of course correction to come back, and that could be, a substantial proportion of the lifetime of the success of that business. So I think it's probably that acceleration of change, and that's where the overwhelm comes from. I think that the stress and the burnout, and we saw a lot of talk about burnout maybe 5 or 10 years ago. People talked about burnout. Now we're hearing overwhelm, and I think that's it's a broader brush problem. Overwhelm is just, I get to the point where you are overwhelmed. I mean, literally it means, you're sort of washed away and underneath the water sort of thing. So I think if you just can't make a decision, you can't process what's going on, you're just overwhelmed by something, And that's such a universal challenge because there's a lot of coaches from right around the world were saying the same thing. That's probably because of the pace of change. And I mention it in the book actually, and it's why I felt Emotional Overdraft was important. And I'm not plugging the book here. My publisher hates me when I say this. I don't care if you don't buy the book. I care if you understand the term emotional overdraft, because it's a really useful label for you to think, I am giving too much of myself. I need to do something differently, because you can reduce an emotional overdraft by behaving differently. You don't have to learn anything. I've got a lot of business books behind me, as Craig already pointed out. You don't have to learn new things to reduce your emotional overdraft. You have to do things differently. And so overwhelm stops you doing something differently because you just can't cope with it. And what I'm saying is, I think is if you can stop for a second, and let's go back to that comment we talked about, coaches listening, giving people space, just an hour to say it out loud, find the words, explore it. No one has that time and I'm generalizing, but no one has that time in their day, in their week, in their month to even do that. They don't take holidays. I've got a client who I used to work with who didn't take half term. So the sort of mid-semester holiday, he wouldn't take that time off because all his staff had kids and he wanted them to take the time off. But what's the price he's paying there? He's not seeing his own kids grow up. He's missing time with his own children. He's not unplugging. We are like electric cars or mobile phones. We need to plug in no matter what you think. If you don't plug your mobile phone in, at some point the battery will run out and you can't will it to keep going. You can't get cross with it because it's stopped. You have to plug it back in, and we're the same. And I think overwhelm has come from that pace of change, that relentlessness of change that we see in business. I mean, this year's change is AI, and all of my clients are going, crikey, what do we do? What do we do about AI? How do we incorporate it? And all the different types of AI, and AI in process, and AI in creativity, and that's what I'm getting asked all the time. It's just the latest version of a lot of other things, but it's accelerating. And I think in the end, you might get to the point as a business leader where you are just not capable of processing it. Because on top of what I talk about is looking at the horizon. So leadership's biggest responsibility is to look at the horizon. You've got to be looking at the horizon and going, what's coming? What are the threats? What are the opportunities? What's the weather doing? If we're going to push the metaphor a little bit. Can we see land? Are we navigating in the right direction? That's actually your job, is to make sure you're head up and looking. And I think in a world which is changing so fast, you're looking and it's changing shape like in some kind of matrix style morphing, and it's really hard to make sense of. And it's quite easy, like we said with the parents and their kids, it's quite easy as a business owner to go, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll focus on looking after that client, making what we make, doing what we do, being in the business, not working on the business, because I know how to do that. At the moment, I know how to do that. And when I was at university, the example, because I was at university a long time ago, the example they gave was the company, and even then it was old, it was the company that made the best valves in the world. And the valves are the things that used to go in radios. And for the kids listening, radios are what we used to do to listen to music. It was an old technology. But valves were these kind of glass bulbs that allowed you to make a radio work. And then 1960 something, the Japanese invented the transistor. And overnight, pretty much, all the valve companies went bust. And you could be making the best valves in the world. You could be head down running this incredible valve business. But I'm pretty sure they felt the same thing, which is they could see this change happening. If they were looking at the horizon at all, they could see the change happening. They didn't know what to do. So they focused on making the best valves they could, because they'll always need valves. Sort of thing my mother would have said, she wanted me to become a cook because she said people will always eat. And she wasn't wrong, but I didn't. Not enough money. And so I think the valve manufacturers are probably where we all are a little bit. If you can't look up, if you can't force yourself to look up and work on your business, if you can't force yourself to think about the longer term, the important but not urgent stuff, it's important. It might not be urgent, but it won't wait forever because the world will change around you. So it's counter logical in a way, or counterintuitive, but actually stopping being busy, getting off the hamster wheel, looking up at the horizon, making time to understand the environment in which your business is operating is one of the best ways to reduce overwhelm. Because you can start, even if you can't control what's going on out there, you can start to organize it. You can start to understand what risks look like, and you can start to mitigate those risks.
So what are the key drivers or what are the key drivers that lead to emotional overdraft?
Well, there are 10. I did some once I'd sort of identified, I'd always realized this thing was a thing, but I didn't have a name for it. So I did from a research background, I did some research. I spoke to 50 companies, and of all the replies I got about what, peeling back the layers and trying to understand what was behind it, rather than not what was the outcome, but what was behind it. I identified 10 drivers, and I won't list them all because it's a long old list, but there are things like trust is a really big driver for founders and entrepreneurs. You grow your business to a certain point, you will be the limiting factor. You'll be the bottleneck in your own business unless you can trust other people. But what lots and lots of founders do, and lots of entrepreneurs do, is they limit the ability of the people around them to be trusted. So you can set people up to fail, or you don't quite give them enough information, or you give them some authority. So you give them some authority. Sorry, you give them some accountability, but you don't give them the authority to do it. It's the 3 A's: accountability, authority, and autonomy. So you might give them accountability and say, okay, I'm going to make you responsible for this bit of my business, but you don't quite give them the authority, and you don't quite give them the autonomy to do it. And then you jump in, and then you go, well, they didn't really succeed. They didn't really do it. And I knew I shouldn't have trusted them, so I'll do it. So trust is this huge driver. I wrote half a book when I first wrote it, curiously, and then the editor said to me, where's the rest of this book? I wrote a description of what emotional overdraft is and what the drivers were. I didn't write the back half, which I had to do, which is what do you do about it? So, with trust, hire great people. I mean, it's easy for me to say that, but really take your time hiring great people. Make sure you hire for attitude, not just for skills. Hire for, I spoke to someone recently and they said they look at what sort of work is the person going to be doing, and they hire for that. So is it going to be mainly working by themselves? Is it going to be running a team? Is it going to be creative? And look at that and work out what sort of person would best fit that, rather than just matching them to the job description and experience. And I think that's really an interesting approach to it. So trust is a driver. Empathy is one which lots of people say to me, Andy, you're mad. Empathy is a great thing in a leader, and empathy is a great thing in a leader. Clarity is kindness and all those things. But being over empathetic is very damaging to the individual. And that's being the people pleaser. That's wanting to be liked by everybody. That's not taking holidays with your kids because you think everyone else should have all the holidays with their kids. That's being over empathetic, and that drives up your emotional overdraft. That's getting in early because the team have been working hard, so you need to get in early as well and be coming in, but at the cost of going to the gym in the morning. Now, that might be empathetic, it might feel empathetic, but it isn't actually helpful behavior to a leader. It's over empathetic. What's better is you to go to the gym, come in feeling refreshed. If people have had to come in early, you arrive an hour later, pumped up and excited. You bring them donuts or whatever, your power bars, and then you bring the energy into the room. That's much better for them. But we can just so easily switch from empathy being a good thing to empathy being a damaging thing to the individual. So that's another good example, I guess. JFDI is one I like, particularly because my publisher insisted that I change it to just flipping do it, because they thought it might upset people if I described what JFDI really was. But just flipping do it is a doer mentality, and almost everyone I talk to, and by the way, you can go online and do a self-assessment for your own emotional. If you're listening to this thinking some of this is resonating, go to emotionaloverdraft.com, and sorry to plug it, Craig. Go to emotionaloverdraft.com and you can do a self-assessment, and it's a spider chart which will tell you where your drivers are. are highest. But JFDI is a doer mentality, and lots of people that set up a business or run a team or become leaders are JFDI people. They get stuff done. Again, I had to catch myself. There's a lot of swearing in this particular chapter if you're not careful. They're doer. They make stuff happen. They get in and they just kind of get things done. And that's brilliant. That's a brilliant thing when you're founding a business and you're the only one there and you're just making things happen. But if you've got a team and you keep jumping in and you keep undermining them because you don't like the way they're doing it, or you keep just doing stuff, what you end up with is a bunch of compliant people who are just going to wait for you to step in because you're training them that you are going to jump in. So in the end, they'll go, well, why will I bother? And they'll sit there and wait, and you'll wake up one day going, why are all my staff so passive? Why isn't anyone like me? I always think of Team America, that amazing, so lonely video, which is terrible. But why isn't he goes in there, he goes, why is everyone so stupid? Why aren't they like me? And we get that in our own heads. Well, there's no such thing as bad dogs, just bad owners. You've created a bunch of staff by your behavior of JFDI where they go, well, I'll sit and wait to do what I'm told. And they become passive. So there are 10 drivers. They are all strengths. It's like every SWOT you ever did at college, isn't it? Every strength is a weakness, every opportunity is a threat. It's why I liked what your person said on the other podcast. It was just so interesting to me. Those are the sort of drivers that occur, but there are 10 of them, and way too much to go through in this pod, I think.
No, it's good. It's good. And I was looking at it before the assessment, so I'm definitely going to do it once we finish the call. I'll find.
And what's fascinating about that is that people, thank you, Craig, sorry, I didn't mean to talk across you, but is that you kind of almost, the way we see the world is so clear that we think everyone's like us. Even if we're very astute and we know everyone isn't like us, we assume everyone sees the world we do. We're the center of our own universe, which is as it should be. But I see the spider charts that get produced by these results, and they're all different. And you find people who are completely comfortable with JFDI. They're completely comfortable with trust and delegation. But their big challenge is they've got a sense of duty, where they feel it's their job because they're running the team or running the business. It's their duty to feel stressed and pressured about it. So you just see these different shapes, and everyone is different. It is remarkable how complex human beings are, even with just 10 different variables.
So once we understand maybe what our emotional overdraft is it something that we can easily work with ourselves, or is it something we really need someone else around us, that proximity of people around us that can support us and guide us through it? Or is it just very individual? It depends on the person.
I think that's a really good question, actually, Greg. I think the answer is both. My view is that even just giving it a name, giving it a label helps, because you become more aware of it. It's a shorthand. It becomes a shorthand for more complex feelings. So, I suggest that you can track it, but so even just knowing that emotional overdraft is the name of this thing where you feel you are having to subsidize your own business either through your physical or mental wellness is going to help, because it will give you pause just knowing that, and you will probably do some things differently, but you won't fix it. Some drivers are definitely about your own thinking and your own behavior, but we exist in an ecosystem, and one of the things I encourage people to do is have a personal board. So have a personal board. And lots of people talk about this, so it's not a new idea. A bit of a magpie, as are most coaches. But this idea of a personal board. So think about a board in a business. You've got all these different skill sets. A personal board is the same. So I would encourage you to have a mentor. No matter how senior you are, I'd encourage you to have a mentor. I'd also encourage you to do some mentorship, because your ability to reflect on the way you see the world when you are mentoring someone else is fascinating. So get a mentor, get a coach. And this is not a plug for me at all. I'm busy. But get a coach in your life a business coach who can help you, who understands your business and can give you some context to your thinking. get a physical coach, get someone who's going to help you, hold you to account for your physicality. So I have a personal trainer who's great, and he encourages me to run twice a week, and I do a personal training session twice a week with the weights. But I probably wouldn't do that. I'm quite busy. If it wasn't for that he's sitting there or standing there waiting for me to arrive. So get yourself a personal board. Have a supporter in your personal board, someone whose job is just to have your back. It's normally a friend of yours, and they don't even have to know they're on your personal board, but maybe it would help. But get this group of advisors around you who you can lean on, and let them maybe know that you're going to do that you're going to lean on them and ask them for help. And they may not want you to pay that back, but you could pay that back to someone else. You could be on someone else's personal board. It's a really good, just look it up on the Google. It's a very simple idea, but I think it gives you a sense of a gang. It can feel very lonely running a business, even if you've got a partnership or your own business board. It can feel incredibly lonely. So for that, we're social beasts. So even at that level, I think it's important to have some people around you. But the behaviors are yours, the thinking is yours, the feelings are yours, and you can do something about that. Having said don't buy the book, do buy the book. Yeah, I think it's got a lot of answers. It's got a lot of answers in the back of it, which I know is help. You write this thing and you hope it's going to be helpful. The feedback I'm getting at the minute is it really is helping people, and that's the utter joy of this privilege of being able to write a book about this stuff.
Beautiful. We all know smart people have great answers, but the most successful people ask great questions. When was the last time you did something for the first time?
I do things for the first time a lot. My coach, about 5 years ago, got me to understand that my curiosity, and that I thrive on learning new things. And I'd stopped learning. I'd been running businesses and running an advisory business, and I was just doing what I did, and I'd stopped learning. So I make a point of trying to do a lot of things for the first time. And I mentioned weights just now, and that's the one I'll particularly pick up on. I played rugby, and I played water polo when I was at school, and I was fairly fit, and I traded on that for about 30 years. And then eventually you can't trade on it anymore, and you just become old and fat. And I realized I had to get fit, and I started running again, which I love. But as you get older, you lose a lot of muscle mass. Every decade, you lose quite a significant proportion of muscle mass. So about a year ago, I started lifting weights again with my personal trainer, Derek. And just recently, I love bench press for some reason. It's the thing I really enjoy. I'm not a meathead, but I love this thing. And I benched 100K recently, and it's taken me about a year to get there. So that was my target, and that was the first time I managed to do it. And I'd been teetering around 92.5, 95 for a long time. I came in one day, not very long ago, and it just worked, and everything was in the groove, and I bench pressed 100K. And I'm sure there are people listening going, 100K, you weed. But I'm 58 and I've only just started, so, be kind. But, 100K, lands on your foot. That's a lot of weight. So, I was really thrilled by that. But so probably the weights for the first time, and then hitting my target for the first time. But it's a lovely question, and I go seeking first times. If I can. Let's try new things, explore stuff.
What is the one question that you would love to solve?
The obvious thing, is it obvious? Is global warming. I think if we fix that, an awful lot of stuff comes back into line, but sadly, I don't think there is a simple fix for that, and I don't think it will be fixed. I think we will live with various types of catastrophe as we will be dealing with catastrophe rather than dealing with answer in there. If I was a bit more broad brush than that, I'd love to solve the challenge of kindness. I think I'd love this sounds so, this is the Miss World answer. I'd love the world to all love each other. And I've never been in Miss World. If you can see on the video, you could probably guess why. But it's hope for us all. I'm still going. I still keep entering. But kindness, I think, not niceness. I think niceness is something different. Niceness is about you and about how you feel about yourself. Being nice to people is about how you feel. Kindness is about how the other person feels. And I would love, the thing I would love to be able to solve is how could everyone be kinder, just be more tolerant? Because I think from that would come some astonishing change. And probably a consequence of more kindness and more tolerance and more understanding would be solving some of the really big questions in the world.
That's some big questions. Actually, do you know that no one's ever shared global warming as their one question? So we've
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's quite fascinating. I thought it would have come up earlier. So well done. You've ticked that box for me.
Yeah, but I'm not original. Yeah.
It doesn't have to be original. It just has to be something to solve. For you, what is an inspiring great leader, and who is a great example of this for you?
So I'd like to give you an example of that everyone would know, but I'm not going to. I'm going to say David Welling, and he was my first boss. And so I was at university, and part of my course was to take a year out working in industry, and I went to work for a paper company, which actually is fascinating. It's a simple ecosystem, but it's business from beginning to end, raw material through to marketing stuff. It was a fascinating time. And David Welling was my boss. He was the marketing director at the company at the time in the 80s. And at the time, I knew I was learning a lot. Looking back, I realized he absolutely set me up for the career I ultimately had. And he went on to run huge paper companies. He became CEO of some very big organizations. He's still a friend of mine. He is on my personal board. He's my mentor. He's the one that encouraged me, amongst others, to write the book. And he, without doubt, has the best answer to any question, always has the best answer. He is so considered. And he also refused to give me a job. So when I finished my placement year, it went very well, actually. And I finished my university, the one more year at university. And he said, look, Andy, we could employ you. We would employ you. I can give you a job, but I don't think you should take it. He said, I think you should go. I think you will not work well in a big machine. You will work better in a small business where what you do, you can see the impact of what you do. And I still remember that. And that was a long time ago. And he was right. He was absolutely right. I am not designed to be a little cog in a big machine. I work better where I can have an impact and I can feel the impact and adapt to it. So David Welling was an absolutely brilliant leader in so many ways, and yet he is one of the few people that refused to give me a job.
I love that. It's such a good answer. I love it. It's been a fascinating conversation. It's got in areas that I'm sure both of us never thought would be possible before we started. But how can people learn more about what you do, and what is the best way for people to connect with you?
So I'm on LinkedIn, Andy Brown. Emotionaloverdraft.com is where the more information about the book is. I have my own podcast as well. So if you want to know more about how other people deal with their emotional overdrafts, that's on there. Everyone knows where to buy a book. So yeah, that, and do the self-assessment. I don't get anything from it, but you will. And I think if you do the self-assessment, if you're listening to this thinking, I wonder where my drivers are, and once you know where your drivers are, you can do something about it. So do the self-assessment, emotionaloverdraft.com. It'll email you the results, or you can get them online. So that's probably where you can find me.
Beautiful. We'll pop all those links in the show notes, so it's nice and easy for people to access them, including the assessment. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you today, Andy. I have thoroughly enjoyed, even before we pushed record, having some good laughs and some great conversations about all things inside and outside of business. And I feel I really feel here you've got something very tangible that people can take a lot of learnings from. It can help them grow, it can help them evolve. And so I really like what you're doing with the Emotional Overdraft. Sharing your insights from, how your formative years to even sharing that your mentor now was someone that decided not to give you a job and encouraged you not to take it is very wise. I love that aspect. A great mentor will give you, what you need to hear, not always what you want to hear. And so I think that's a really, really valuable learning there for everyone. To even looking at how decisions are made and different approaches for leadership now, and the challenges we face in businesses, with the speed of change, the acceleration of change, and the complexity that it brings. There is light in the end of the tunnel. And, I think what we can learn from this is don't let it overwhelm yourself. There are ways to, manage the speed at which with the world is working, and also to manage the emotions that we have so that we don't go into overdraft or even overdrive, so to speak, as you talked about at the beginning. So thank you very much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I look forward to continuing the conversation well beyond this episode.
That was fantastic. Thank you for having me.
It's time for you to join the Inspiring Great Leaders movement by visiting craigjohns.com.au. Share this podcast on LinkedIn and be sure to hashtag Inspiring Great Leaders. We would love it if you could leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Drop us a line with your feedback and questions and connect with us on the Craig Johns LinkedIn, Facebook and Instagram pages. Be sure to check out the next Inspiring Great Leaders podcast, where the ordinary don't belong.